I wish that we didn't have to, to have that conversation. Unfortunately, as of tomorrow, it's Israel Apartheid week. And this is, I think it has been going on since 2005, if I'm not mistaken. And it's essentially an effort by academia, political actors, and activists to basically delegitimize the state of Israel. By extension, I think the Jewish community, and paint Israel under adjectives that are less than friendly and very negative. I think it's those claims are quite nefarious and insidious in painting not just the state of Israel, but again, the whole diaspora under a very, very negative light. And that is, of course, to associate and level accusation at the state of Israel that it's indeed an apartheid state. And that means that they are trying to pursue profoundly racial policies against Palestinians and the Israeli Arab citizens, which obviously is not the case. So I know that, Rolene, you are an expert on this. You are a media expert, a PR expert. You have held countless lectures on this subject across the world. And so I'm just going to leave the floor to you in just about 10 seconds. But the first thing that I wanted to establish and tell our viewers today is that ELNET UK profoundly and absolutely reject those claims that Israel is an apartheid state. I think that personally and our organization believe that, those accusations are part of this politics of antisemitism, that the language is meant to inflame sentiments and to paint a picture again of Israel that is so very negative that people would hold and carry on holding bias and prejudices towards Israel in view of actually trying to negate its right to be and the existence of its people as the indigenous people of the land of Israel. So now that I've said my little piece, I'm just going to let you carry on. And if you could kind of, give me a little bit of a history lesson here as to, why do you think, first of all, this movement was started against Israel, this campaign, and this claim, which is a very kind of, historically heavy claim, because obviously you're from South Africa, and South Africa went through a very dark chapter of its history, with apartheid, and millions of people suffered under it. So if you could give me some context here, socio-political context, and also share with us, why is it that you think that, those accusations were leveled at the state of Israel and again, the Jewish community? I'm making a point at repeating this because I think that it's often forgotten in those conversations.
Well, I think, first of all, thank you for having me today. I'm delighted to be your first ever guest. And I think you raise a lot of very, very important issues because as Jews, whether you live in Israel or in the diaspora around the world, we are seen as the de facto spokespeople for the state of Israel. So no doubt your listeners can tell by my very, very strange accent. I come from South Africa. I grew up during the years of apartheid. And I think if we're going to discuss the whole comparison, and it really is, as you said, a nefarious comparison between the state of Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people, to South Africa. Let's take a look, first of all, at what apartheid was, because the word apartheid is very, very emotive and is guaranteed to get very, very strong responses from people. Most people don't know exactly what it was, but they associate it with racism. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about, why this accusation of apartheid against Israel and where it originated and how it has spread around the world. So in a nutshell, the word apartheid, an Afrikaans word meaning separateness or to separate. And what a lot of us South Africans who live in Israel would like people to start doing is to write the word apartheid with a capital A. And the reason is simple, because apartheid was unique to South Africa. It's part of the South African historical narrative and experience. And in a nutshell, was laws instituted or legislated where a minority of white people governed over the indigenous majority of Black people or non-white people. And these were state legislated laws that governed every aspect of a person's life and deemed anybody in those days who were termed non-European, that was the euphemism used, or rather non-white, as a discriminated against or inferior against community. So these were laws that decided everything: where you could go to school, where you could live, how you could move around, how you could express yourself. They prohibited Black people from organizing themselves politically and fighting the apartheid movement, which was why so many of the anti-apartheid groups were outlawed. It governed absolutely every aspect of a person's life. And sorry to sound crude, from where you could go to the bathroom, to who you could sleep with, to who you could marry, to what kind of careers you could enter. It really instituted a lower standard of living for non-white people, where they were taught in schools in Afrikaans, a language that was not indigenous to their communities, in inferior schools, and were basically deemed second-class citizens. And it's very important we understand that, because when we look at the situation in Israel, there is a propensity for people to not be able to make a distinction between Arab Israelis who enjoy fully enfranchised rights, and Palestinians who are not governed or who don't fall under the remit of the Israeli government. We know in the Gaza Strip, they are governed by Hamas, and in the disputed West Bank, or as some people might call it, Judea and Samaria, they are governed by the Palestinian Authority. So it's important we understand those differences. Is there racism in Israel? Yes, there is. Absolutely the same as, unfortunately, there is racism and discrimination against minorities in all countries around the world. But is it legislated into the laws of the country? No, it's not. And that is the fundamental difference. If we're going to draw a comparison, I can draw a comparison with legislation under the Palestinian Authority, where they say if there is a Palestinian state, no Jews would be allowed to live there. That would be legislated into their bodies of law. So
if I can just interject here, I think you make a very valid point, is that a lot of the accusations that are leveled at the state of Israel actually not only don't hold, in the face of, actual facts. And like you said, Israeli Arabs enjoy absolutely equal right with, with Jews in Israel. But not only that, is that, you mentioned about how, for example, there is actual racism. And I would say, the application of antisemitism on the other side by certain political actors is actually codified in law. A Palestinian, for example, cannot sell a land to a Jew or an Israeli. So it's not just directed at one country. It's also directed at a very particular, minority. And I think it's not talked about, because if people want to challenge Israel on those things that they might perceive as being unfair, then it would be a good idea to actually, to follow that argument to the end and actually challenge the Palestinian Authority when they do, violate what I would like to think is common sense. And you cannot, 21st century, legislate on the basis of rejection, on the basis of race or gender, whatever it is. But rejection as the basis for law is never a good idea.
Well, we say that Natan Sharansky, who is an iconic human rights activist, he was also a great friend to Nelson Mandela, who is the father of the anti-apartheid movement. He determined that you can define anti-Semitism by using the 3 Ds: demonization, delegitimization, and double standards. And the accusation of calling Israel an apartheid state falls into those 3 categories. It's the demonization of the Jewish state as being the pariah of the world. It is the delegitimization of the Jewish state by saying you have no right to exist because you practice apartheid. And it is the double standard, which you just spoke about, how laws are codified into Palestinian law. And, you know, there is a propensity of the world to turn a blind eye to that. So let's talk about, you know, where this accusation originated, because another fundamental difference is that during the years of apartheid, the world pressurized South Africa to end its racist practices and end its racist laws. But nobody said the state of, or the Republic of South Africa had no right to exist. Here we see a different paradigm. We see this campaign birthed in hatred that seeks to end the nation state of the Jewish people as we know it. And there's so many elements. So let's go back to the very beginning. Where did this apartheid analogy really come into global consciousness? And we have to go back to Durban 2001 in South Africa, to the United Nations Conference Against Racism. Now, it's no coincidence that the boycott divestment movement was launched there, the BDS, boycott, divestment and sanctions movement. It's no coincidence that the accusation of Israel being an apartheid state came out of there, because if you are going to launch a campaign of turning Israel into the pariah of the world, like you did with South Africa, where better to do that with racism as its central charge than at a UN conference against racism. Where else but in Durban, South Africa. South Africa, the country where apartheid was born and the country where apartheid was defeated. So make no mistake, this was a carefully planned campaign. You know, if we follow the money, we can follow it back to Tehran in a big conference that took place before the Durban 2001 conference. And if we look at how it was orchestrated in parallel to the plenary, we had the NGO conference. And what did we have coming out of that NGO conference? We had so-called human rights organizations like Amnesty International, like Human Rights Watch, and various others pushing this narrative that Israel is an apartheid state, it's a racist state, it must be singled out for opprobrium, and it must be determined to be the pariah of the world and excluded from the family of nations until it ceases to exist in its current state. Now, the language...
I'd like you to, I want to pick this point out because we had discussions, you know, prior to the podcast, and you made a point that I thought was very, very important. And when you refer to the right to exist, because, you know, a lot of the time people say many things, and, you know, including BDS, you know, they make those claims. And it's like you said, it's again, very emotionally charged. And people receive this information, but a lot of the time they don't actually follow the argument to the very end, trying to understand what is it that you're trying to tell me by, you know, accusing the state of Israel of, you know, doing this and that. What is it that you want to see achieve? And a lot of the time we actually don't have those conversations where they openly declare, well, actually what they're trying to do is to delegitimize the state of Israel, not on the basis of its politics or its policies or even its laws. It's actually to make the argument that it doesn't have a right to be. End of this sentence.
Well, they clearly stated. They clearly stated on their websites that their goal, in fact, Omar Barghouti, who is the founder of the BDS, or the voice of the BDS movement, who incidentally studied in a Tel Aviv university, so he got all the benefits of this so-called apartheid state, which he wouldn't have been allowed to get had Israel actually been an apartheid state, because the laws of South Africa determined where a person who wasn't of the so-called ruling class could study. He reaped the benefit of that. He clearly states on his website for BDS that they want the nation state of Israel to cease to exist in its current form. They're very clever in couching the language of human rights to try and draw in the masses, because as we know, young people are very human rights aware. They're very tuned into social justice issues, and the BDS movement and the so-called human rights organizations are very, very, very clear. In fact, they are the consummate marketers in knowing exactly how to get their messages across. Now, I want to be very clear and say that if you want to criticize any policies in Israel, that is absolutely legitimate and that is democratic. I mean, it's the national sport of Israel. If Israel could have a national sport, our sport would be criticizing the government because, you know, as we say, 2 Jews, 10 opinions, and a subcommittee to discuss it even further. But when you say that Israel has no right to exist, we're having a completely different conversation. And that's why we see this use of the apartheid analogy. They know we can't defeat Israel militarily. The country is too strong. It's got one of the strongest armies in the world. We can't defeat them in any other way. So we're going to use the application of lawfare and use, you know, very impressive, very emotional language like human rights, and we're going to make those kind of arguments. We're going to push out these campaigns. We're going to take it, you know, to the streets, to communities around the world, and especially in academia and on university campuses, where we are going to teach and grow future policy makers and opinion makers. And that is why this whole campaign is, to use the word you so brilliantly used, is nefarious. And we see how it actually preys on those who are the most vulnerable, and those are young people who want to be seen as serious social justice warriors because they inherently are concerned with social justice issues.
And so should they. And I think it's such a shame that, you know, people are literally preying on their good intentions and their desire to actually change the world and you know, demand accountability when crimes are being committed, and it's been exploited. And also, you know, the underlying tone for me of this campaign against Israel, and I don't like to use the word easily, in my mind has genocidal undertones, because of the echo that it kind of carries, you know, this kind of message that the Islamic Republic has projected onto the world, something that has been repeated across by, you know, groups such as, you know, Hamas and Hezbollah and others, you know, who label themselves as being pro-Palestinians. And the one thing that, you know, I think we need to address is the fact that a lot of the time, you know, when we discuss anything related to Israel and the Palestinian issue, people tend to think that it's a zero-sum game, that in order to, you know, to be pro-Palestinian, one needs to be, you know, completely against Israel, or vice versa. And I think that actually, until we actually recognize that, you know, if you demand for people to recognize your rights, then you have to accept that, you know, the person across the table that you might not like very much for various reasons actually has a right to those very rights that you demand for yourselves. And that until we understand that, you know, it's finding a way together, whatever that way would look like, as long as it works and that it's, you know, it's through consensus and that people, you know, are behind it. There's no reason that we should deny the existence of an entire people on the basis that, you know, we can't find a solution to the problem that we have today. A problem that has been politicized so much that a lot of the time I feel that those people who claim to be pro-Palestinians and, you know, launch those campaigns against the state of Israel and the Jewish people by extension, are actually most of the time not asking Palestinians how they feel, you know, about the claims that they project onto them, and the solutions that they claim to, you know, to be bringing to them. And it kind of baffles me that a lot of the time, yes, you have some, you know, very kind of well-known Palestinian figures, you know, who are part of those various political groups, but I'm talking about the people. It would be interesting, I think, to actually ask the people, what is it that you want to see? And also, do you actually feel oppressed by, I'm talking about Israeli Arabs, do you feel oppressed in the state of Israel? The answer would be no, because again, they benefit from all the rights and privileges that other Israeli benefit from. And there was never a time in Israel that it was ever suspended. And, I think that, again, when you were talking about the fact that people tend to conflate security issues and what happens in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, they don't understand that those areas are not, they might be under the control of Israel in terms of security, and because you have some very clear agreements that have been, kind of laid out and signed upon. This is not related to what happens within the borders of the state of Israel. And that, again, it's not, you don't have a law that says that, Palestinians or Arabs or Muslims don't have access to X, Y, Z. That's not true. And also, I think that a lot of the time people reduce, this argument to a sectarian argument, forgetting that Palestinians also, are not just, reduced down to just one faith. The Palestinian people are many faiths and many different colors. And so I think that there's this very reductive argument that it's always, Judaism versus Islam, forgetting that Palestinians are Christians and, some of them are Baha'i and others, other religious minorities. So it's quite interesting that they want to reduce the problem to this dot and kind of inflame, passions around it and just make it big storm that is used for, in my mind, a call for genocide.
Well, what we say, Peace in the Middle East is the shortest book ever written. But there's a lot to unpack with your statement there. And let's start with the calls for genocide, because very often we will hear, and we see it especially on university campuses, and you're certainly going to see it this coming week in the United Kingdom. Last week it was in South Africa. This Israel Apartheid week, I call it Haterpalooza, because it's like it's this annual festival of hate that winds its way across cities and university campuses around the world. And we're going to hear that call, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. And that has nothing to do with the freedom of Palestinians. When you're saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, what you actually are doing is you're calling for genocide of the Jewish state, of the Jewish people again. What people need to understand is that you've got two separate entities, Israelis and Palestinians, both with national aspirations, who don't want to live together. It's very clear about that, and need the best or most amicable as possible divorce. We're two people who clearly we want to be majorities in our own countries. The way we get to do that, this is the longest pursuit for peace, I think, that Israel has ever had. So there's that, and it is reductive to reduce everything to such simple language, because this is a very, very complicated conflict. If it was a conflict just about land, it would have been settled a long time ago, possibly. There are many, many different elements and moving parts to this conflict. And then, as you said, asking Palestinians what they want. People forget that when you call for boycotts, divestment, and sanctions against Israel, the people you are harming the most is the Palestinians. Israel's economy right now is extremely robust. I think we're long past the startup nation, with the innovation nation. And these companies employ a lot of Palestinians. And like we've seen with SodaStream and with Ben & Jerry's and with other examples in the past, the minute you put in those calls to boycott, to divest your money, to apply sanctions, you cost Palestinian people who just want to earn a decent living, you cost them their income, you cost them their right to earn a dignified living. If we talk about, the laws of apartheid and where it can be applied elsewhere in the region, Israel's greatest detractors, who will call Israel an apartheid state, and yes, I'm talking to you, Ken Roth, and I'm talking to you, Amnesty International, are very, very quiet when it comes to countries like Lebanon, where Palestinians who live in Lebanon are prohibited from entering different professions or from owning property. That is instituted and codified into law. That is apartheid. If we look at what is happening in the Gaza Strip, where there is gender apartheid, where there is political apartheid, because there is no opposition, where there is sexual orientation apartheid, and not to take away from how specific apartheid was to South Africans, because I've said it before and I'll say it again, apartheid was unique to South Africa. But if we are comparing the definition for definition, we have to look elsewhere in the region, because we can find some sure examples. But to call Israel an apartheid state, it takes away from the uniqueness of what apartheid was to South Africa. It appropriates the suffering and the narrative of the victims of apartheid in South Africa, the millions of victims, as you said. And as a South African Israeli, I feel that it is an absolute imperative for those of us who grew up in South Africa, who witnessed apartheid, and who live in Israel now, to take back the narratives of both of our countries.
I agree. I want to ask you a question, because I thought about it quite a lot as to, like, why is it that they use that word? And I think, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that there's a very strong connotation to colonialism, and this notion that, for example, the Islamic Republic and other political actors have tried to sell the world, is that Israel is a colonial power, because obviously it takes away, from the ties that Jews have with the land of Israel. Even prior to, I would say, the creation of the modern state of Israel, that our history is forever tied to the land of Israel. Whatever names people have given it throughout history, it was still for us the land of Israel. And I think it's quite interesting to see that there's been an evolution, because, again, you refer to those right organizations who refuse to criticize, for example, Lebanon and other parties in the region for some of what they feel are human rights violation towards Palestinian refugees. I think, again, it falls within this narrative of colonialism. That is very difficult to argue colonialism when we're talking about Lebanon, because obviously they are sovereign within their borders, and so should they. And so it's assumed and it's inferred that they have the right, to kind of codify however they wish, because they have, they have their sovereignty and political self-determination, that they can do whatever they want within the sanctity of their borders. For some reason, this courtesy is not extended to the state of Israel. So we're going back to the double standard. But I think that the main, I would say, take away the idea that they're trying to project and actually enshrine, within, people's subconscious, is actually by labeling it as, an apartheid state. They're actually making a reference to colonialism, because, of course, South Africa was colonized, which is why, Black communities there and other ethnic minorities were actually persecuted. Is that there was a very kind of clear hierarchy in terms of where people stood in the food chain, and the fact that it was their land, they were indigenous to this land and therefore should have rights, was completely denied to them, because obviously they were not in the business of sharing natural resources and actually giving Africans the courtesy of their rights. I think maybe I'm understanding the situation wrong, and you would know better. But I feel there's a lot of that going on, and again, it's not being unpacked, I think, enough, because it's always a good idea to kind of force people to go to the end of the argument, to try to understand what is it that they're saying it and why they're saying it, because then I think it's easier to kind of challenge them and demand accountability for the thing that they say, which that are not true, because there's no basis in to what it is that they say. There are no facts to actually back up the argument, no data, not really. I mean, it's always anonymous sources, or it's always very kind of emotional, as opposed to cold hard facts. Where can you show me that there is a law in Israel that prevent people from attending university, for example, on the basis of color, religion, or ethnicity? Nowhere.
This is why it is so important that we understand exactly what apartheid was, because we see people like Muhammad al-Kurd, a notorious anti-Semite who is schlepped to university campuses around the world. Just last week in Australia, he said, I don't care about the definition of apartheid. I don't care if it's accurate or not. I just want to paint Israel as a demon state. I'm paraphrasing, but that was basically the idea of what he said. And we've got organizations like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, and I got back to them because they've released those two very, very dangerous reports filled with factual inaccuracies to employ this campaign of lawfare against the state of Israel, and they've completely redefined it to suit their agenda. But it's important we understand what it was, because again, apartheid was so unique to South Africans, and it's important what you are saying about words like colonialism, because these are the buzzwords that are very sexy, that are guaranteed to get a rise out of people. And I go back to before we had a modern state of Israel. Israel was also colonized. We were colonized by the British. We've been colonized by the Turks. We've been colonized by so many different people throughout our history. But thank God we've always had a Jewish presence in the land of Israel. And before we had a state of Israel, Theodor Herzl, who's the father, the architect of modern day Zionism, who did he draw parallels with? Who did he have an affinity with besides the historical land of Israel? The African continent, because he recognized that the story of African countries and the story of Israel was so similar. Yes, we have similar climates and similar challenges in today's world, but we know what it's like to be people who have been colonized. It's part of both our narratives. That is why Golda Meir, when she became prime minister, she had such an affinity to Africa. And she was also the prime minister that took a very, very strong stand against apartheid in South Africa. I'll get back to that in a minute. South Africa and Israel's relationship during the apartheid years, because it's also another accusation that Israel's detractors like to hurl at her. But Israeli leaders, from Herzl to Meir to even our leaders today, we've seen it just in the last couple of weeks, the growing of bilateral ties with Israel and African countries who are saying, wait a minute, we shouldn't have to choose sides in this conflict. We can be both Palestinian supporters and pro-Israel, because we have to look at what benefits our countries, and it's not beneficial to African countries to cut off ties with the state of Israel. No country is better equipped to help African countries than the state of Israel. So, I want to go back to that accusation made against Israel during the years of apartheid. And yes, in 1970, there was cooperation between the two countries, because both countries were kind of ostracized from the world, following the Yom Kippur War. But when Israeli leaders understood the severity of apartheid, they would not allow Israeli technology or Israeli cooperation in any sphere that drove the apartheid regime. And trade between the two countries was absolutely minuscule compared to the trade between South Africa and other countries in the world who did supply the Land Rovers, who did supply the airplane parts, who did supply the fuel. And these were Arab countries that drove the apartheid machine.
That's interesting. I think that's quite interesting. I know again that we had a few conversations, and I want to talk about the cultural boycott a bit more. I know you touched upon it, but I feel that again, it's such a it's such a strange thing to me that, an organization could claim to want to protect against, this horrible thing that is apartheid, and, making all those accusations and arguments, which, I mean, in theory, I would understand that, they would want to protect a minority if the case was that, yes, in fact, they are being persecuted. I think that people should speak up. And again, I think that any form of criticism against Israel should be welcome, as long as it's anchored in reality, and not defined to pursue a genocidal agenda. But I think like what they're actually arguing is actually just that it's apartheid against Israel. It's the isolation to better kind of take out. And I don't understand. I do understand the why, and I know what is it that they want. I just can't understand why is it that it has gone on since 2005. So it's been it's been over a decade now. But people are not really catching on to it, are they? Why do you think it is that it's been many people, not just ELNET UK, but many organizations and academics and people like you have come out and stood against it, and they make very rational, reasonable arguments. They come on with facts, so it's kind of difficult to argue against reality. And yet, I mean, to this day, I'm having a conversation with people, and they don't seem to understand that the very thing that Israel is actually being accused of is being carried out against Israel, and that it's just a case of projection, which is it's insanity a little bit, that people refuse, it's like they have blinders on and they refuse to see. Why is it in your mind that it's preventing people? Is it just prejudice and bias, or there's like they've been preconditioned to just kind of suspend their critical thinking when it comes to Israel? Why is it that people can't just have a rational conversation? It gets very emotional all the time, and people get angry. And I'm thinking, can't we just have a reasonable, cards on the table? Just give me facts. Let's talk facts. It's like let's talk maths, let's talk numbers, and just look at it rationally. Why can't it happen? Why is it that it's preventing people from getting that?
Well, I think it's extraordinary. I mean, when you work in the media and you see how much space Israel, to use a want of a better word, occupies in the priority of news channels at the expense of other conflicts around the world. I mean, as we speak, there are so many conflicts happening around the world, from Ukraine to Africa to South America to Asia. There are conflicts all around the world, yet there is this irrational focus, this disproportionate, and I use that word intentionally, focus on Israel's conflict with her neighbors that is decades old. So you're asking me, why is there like this inherent bias? Is it like an unconscious bias? And maybe it's not so unconscious, this bias. We've seen anti-Semitism evolve over generations to take on different manifestations. And now today, we see this manifestation of anti-Semitism take on this mantle of anti-Zionism. I love Jews. Mazel tov, gefilte fish. Some of my best friends are Jewish. I just don't like the state of Israel. But as you said so correctly, the singling out of Israel for opprobrium at the expense of conflicts around the world, that is racist. That is absolutely racist. And we talk about cultural boycotts and sports boycotts. What brings people together? What builds bridges? Sports, music, theater. What better way to build bridges? And I'm a firm believer that peace doesn't come from governments down, it comes from people up. What builds bridges? Sports, cultural events, getting together. I always say to South Africans when I'm in debates with members of the BDS movement, why are you so scared to come to South Africa? Why do you advocate this policy of boycotting, divestment, and sanctions and have an absolute platz when somebody wants to visit Israel? Are you scared that you are going to be proven wrong? Are you scared that people are going to get to see that the reality on the ground is not part of the agenda that you are pushing? We've had some phenomenal stories of South Africans, part of the BDS movement, who've actually come here expecting separate toilets, expecting signs to say, you know, you must go here and you must go there. And when they don't see it, they say, where's the apartheid? And they become the greatest supporters of the state of Israel, understanding that this is a complicated conflict. But policies of boycotts, divesting your money, applying sanctions is not going to help. What ended apartheid in South Africa? Because the economy of South Africa was pretty strong during the apartheid years. What ended apartheid was brave leaders, Nelson Mandela, and at the time, F.W. de Klerk, the leader of the National Party, the president of South Africa at the time, who took the brave step to say, you know what, I'm going to sit down with my enemy, because as Nelson Mandela said, we make peace with our enemies, and to have those conversations and to start at the negotiating table to end the policies of apartheid. It takes brave leaders. And the question that we should be asking is, where are our Mandela and de Klerk here that are prepared to have those conversations? Obviously, this is a very, very complicated conflict. You are an expert on Iran. You will know the Iranian influence in ensuring that this conflict is not solved by shoring up their proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and others.
Against the best interests of Palestinians.
Against the best interest of Palestinians. And in my opinion, the social justice warriors, again, I'm talking to you, Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, in case you're watching, the student groups on campus who are so hell-bent in pushing this conflict, they're not interested in finding solutions. They're not interested in peace. And what I would say to Jewish students and Zionist students out there, because we know so many of you who are pro-Israel are not just Jews, is confront them and ask them why they are anti-peace.
I think, look, my best advice actually for people, because again, I mean, if people want to be critical, that's absolutely fine. I mean, you know, they're entitled to their criticism, and they're absolutely free to think whatever it is that they want to think, and also say whatever it is that they want to say. But it would be very refreshing for them, you know, before they make those accusations, which are really, really heavy accusations, to actually come and visit Israel. And you know, actually, ELNET UK organizes a lot of delegations, you know, with the press and with peers and parliamentarians to Israel, you know, for that very purpose. Is that, you know, we're not in the business of selling people any politics. You know, we're not trying to sell them on anything. What we're trying to say is that, Israel is here. Israel is here to stay. And I think that the most, I would say, reasonable action to take would be to get to know one another. And, you know, maybe they would realize that actually their fears or their concern, you know, are actually not real. That, you know, they've been fabricated by those people who actually want to, again, push very political agenda. And that the reality on the ground often, and it's not, I mean, look, it's a 5.5 hours flight, you know, from the UK, lovely weather. I mean, I couldn't think of worse, you know, holiday destination, for anyone. I would invite anyone to just go and check it out. I mean, and again, they don't have to limit themselves to very touristic areas. I mean, you know, Israel is a free country. Just walk around, talk to people. And I think that people would be very, very surprised, because the reality that they are given, you know, by sound bites in the media is very different from the one on the ground. And that I think a lot of it has been distorted is the word that I was looking for. There's massive distortion. And I think that also those people who want to do good, and I want to believe that they want to do good. I think are under a lot of misapprehension. And again, I think that they haven't visited Israel, because if they did, they would not be, you know, they would not be able to keep to the narrative, because, I mean, unless they suffer from cognitive dissonance, and then I can't help them. But unless you're profoundly blind and refuse to see, it's quite clear that whatever it is that they claiming is in Israel is in fact not at all. It's in the imagination, and it's about, again, if they want to criticize, fantastic, great, like, let us know what you think, but please anchor your criticism in reality, and again, you come to me with facts and real stories. That's
exactly it. Is come and see the situation for yourself. You will see that Israel is a robust democracy. Yes, we've got our issues. I mean, at the moment, we've had 11 weeks of Israelis taking to the streets in protest. And, I'm not even going to...
The UK had about 10 prime minister in less than 2 weeks. So,
I'm not even going to...
I mean, look, every democracy goes...
Every democracy.
I call them the growing pains of democracy. I mean, it proves that it works. Look, as long as people are able to demonstrate and kind of, voice their, whatever it is that they want to say, it's good news, because it means that, the system at its very core works, and that, people will find a way. I don't think that anyone has lesson to give. Every country, again, has its own trajectory when it comes to democracy, which is, it is the way that it is. Again, like I said, in the UK, we had a few crises as well. We came through. And I think that just, sometimes you need to just let it breathe a little bit. And, well, look, at the end of the day, it is what it is. But I don't think that passing judgment on an entire country on the basis of a crisis, I don't think it's very useful.
Especially when you invoke a double standard and don't apply the same lens to other conflicts. And I think what we need to do is to be more proactive. We need to hold our media more accountable for their biased coverage. And
that would be nice, wouldn't it?
And the language that they are using. Campuses, unfortunately, in my opinion, are the front line of the narrative war. And the situation is such that it's created a climate for many students and faculty members where it's extremely, extremely hostile and dangerous. And dangerous. I mean, how many students next week or this week in the United Kingdom don't want to go to university because of the climate on their campus for Israel Apartheid Week? And we have to hold universities more accountable for, there's one thing to have academic freedom and academic space for discussion, but it's another to create a climate where students feel that it's intolerable for them to come to university for a week of hate. Well, thank goodness we've got the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which puts the slurs of calling Israel an apartheid state squarely under their definition. And of course, that's why the critics don't want it, because they don't want to be called out for their anti-Semitism. And it's important that we call it out for what it is: the demonization of the one and only Jewish state, and holding Jews responsible, demonizing Jews, because holding Jews responsible for anything that you want to hold them responsible for. The delegitimization, which is the central goal of this campaign, which is to delegitimize the Jewish state and say it has no right to exist, and the double standard that they are employing. You're not looking at any other conflict and looking at it through the same parameters, just conveniently that Jewish state.
Yeah, well, again, I think it falls within the politics of anti-Semitism. But I think our biggest mistake so far has been to miss the fact that it exists, and it has been promoted in the way that he has been promoted, I would say, most aggressively over the past decade or so. For a very simple reason, is that you have very prominent actors on the international scene, that have vested interest in doing so. And it's nothing to do with, again, trying to find a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or issue, however you wanna call it. It's not to bring peace. It's not to bring normalization, because a lot of the time people think that normalization is just, Israel in relation to neighbors. I think that normalization needs to be understood as a whole, between people across the region, without distinction. That once people accept each other and actually agree that yes, we should all claim the same rights and privileges, because that's true normalization, an acceptance of other people's differences, rather than point it out and make it a matter of contention. I think that differences need to be celebrated rather than, again, become the source of, animosity. Why? Differences make us who we are. And I think that actually the Jewish people, more than most people, would understand that, because we literally were kind of spread, the four corners of the world. And when we came back together, we came back with, our own idiosyncrasies. And, people were quite different, but still, we had this common thread. And I think it's, for me, it's a beautiful analogy to what humanity is actually, is the fact that, a people could share enough common ground to, recognize their humanity and celebrate the differences, and understand that it's actually not only part of the greater whole, but enriches them ultimately.
Well, speaking about normalization, look what is happening in our region with normalization treaties. The trade with the United Arab Emirates has exceeded over $1 billion. We've had successive memorandums of understanding signed between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, between Israel and Bahrain, between Israel and Morocco, and the region is a richer and better place because of it. And we've also seen with our Jordanian and with our Egyptian brothers and sisters, they're also paying attention and seeing that they could turn their sort of like cold peace into a warm peace. Because look at the economic benefits for all. And, it's my hope that there will come a day where there will be a brave Palestinian leader who says, it's enough with the influence of Iran and other actors who seek to perpetuate the conflict. The only way forward that benefits all of us, and especially our children and our children's future, is to normalize and is to seek solutions. And there's no benefit in perpetuating this appalling apartheid analogy, which does the greatest insult to the victims of apartheid and insults both Israelis and Palestinians, because it robs all of us of looking for viable solutions.
I agree. And going back on what you were talking about normalization and, the Abraham Accords and bilateral trades, this is something, for example, that if the BDS movement and this whole, campaign against Israel was actually successful, or were to be successful, that would not have never happened. And it would be a shame for everybody concerned, because, obviously normalization benefits all parties. It's not just, the one-way street where Israel benefits, because it has peace. Other countries benefit from, again, bilateral trades, exchange of technology, culturally. It's just, people now kind of are learning to live, with one another and learn from each other, which I think is the main takeaway. And it's only going to empower the region and benefit, the Middle East, which is good. Because I'd like to think that's what people and human rights activists would want, right? It's for the region.
One would hope that's what they would want.
Exactly. So again, I think there's a great hypocrisy, because look, I will never fault anyone for defending, the rights of Palestinians or any other people for that matter, because, I demand, I would expect people to stand up and fight for me if my rights were denied. So I will be always the first one to speak up. But I think there's a great hypocrisy in anchoring your defense of one particular people on the negation of another. It just makes no sense to me whatsoever. And I'd like to think that we have moved on from that kind of thinking, but clearly not. And again, I would literally genuinely invite people, to ask questions. I'm not saying that they have to agree with everything that we say, But just go check it out for yourself. Visit Israel, engage with Israelis or the Jewish community, or ask questions. Just ask questions.
And have the
read.
uncomfortable conversations. I think very often many in our communities around the world are scared of, especially young people, asking them uncomfortable questions. And my advice to them would be, have the difficult conversations. Don't shut them out, because they're coming to you with real concerns. They're coming to you with real issues that they are hearing from their peers. So make sure that you are knowledgeable enough and have those uncomfortable discussions. And just for all of those on campus supporting BDS, thinking that it's a righteous a cause to support, you're not working on our economy. Israel's economy is strong and robust. Where they are having an effect is on the morale, especially of young Jews who feel consistently ostracized and terrified of the situation that they find themselves on campus.
No, and it's not okay. It's never okay. It should never be okay. And look, again, if right organization want to to kind of claim to that label, which is a very honorable label, they can't discriminate. And unfortunately, I feel that that's what they do. I mean, it's more than just a feeling. It's a very strong it's an opinion that I have, and I would love to be proven wrong. But so far, facts are telling me, and again, I'm referring to Israel Apartheid week, telling me that actually, yes, there is a pointing out, there is a rejection of a particular people, a singling out, and it's not okay, because one can criticize rejection altogether with undertone of genocide, less so. I don't think that there's a room or space for this anymore, ever again. And people need to realize that is what is happening. But unfortunately, I don't think it's very fashionable, to say those things.
Well, the next time somebody says free Palestine, say absolutely free Palestine from the stranglehold of Iran and the hate mongers who want to perpetuate more conflict and who want to spread more libelous accusations, like the comparison with apartheid, and those who want to create more hate and more division, and stop importing a conflict that's in the Middle East into your countries and onto your campuses and into your cities around the world, because it is not of any benefit to anyone.
Also, when they say, when people tend to do this, it's almost an accusation. And I'm always kind of baffled, because I'm thinking, well, yes, of course, of course, people want to advocate freedom. I think it's a natural state as a human being. But it's always, launched, as an accusation. And again, it baffles me a little bit. I understand the political context and the why. But again, I don't think that anyone is actually arguing against Palestinians. It's just that obviously, there's a situation that is what it is today, and there are security concerns to be considered, and also it's very difficult to be to host to host any kind of talks when people are actually calling for the erasure of the state of Israel. It's very difficult, I think, for Israel to sit across a table when the people on the other side are actually asking for them to disappear. It's hard to do. And I think that people need to consider this, and again, I don't think that anyone should never, say anything as an other. Of course, we want freedom for the Palestinians. Of course.
You can only make peace with a partner whose existence you recognize.
Well, look, Rolene, it's been an absolute pleasure. I wish we had more time. We coming up to the hour, so I'm just going to have to leave it there. Again, I'm so grateful that you took the time. You've been very generous with us. I hope that it's going to be the first of many.
Me too. It's my absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. I hope that we can talk about many various things, and not always the negative, because I know that you're doing tremendous work in that space. And I would love to talk about the good stuff, to talk about technological breakthrough, cultural achievements, and all the the things that Israel has to offer the rest of the world, and hopefully move the conversation on, I would say, more friendly ground, and for people to learn that Israel is actually a beautiful, rich country that again, like I said, 5.5 hours from the UK. So I would say jump on a plane, come and see for yourself. So thank you
so much for hosting me. It's been such a pleasure.